In this episode, we talk about the 17-year-old Indian Grandmaster D Gukesh's historic win at the candidate tournament. We also talk about Uddhav Thackeray dismissing the Election Commission's notice regarding his party's new theme song. But first, we talk about the ongoing tensions in Manipur and what the state witnessed last week during polling. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. On Friday, the first day of the Lok Sabha polls, one of the states that witnessed polling was Manipur, which has been experiencing ethnic violence since May last year between the dominant Meitei and the Kuki-Zomi community. On that first day, the state experienced multiple incidents of gunfire, damage to EVMs, and burning of documents.
So obviously elections in Manipur are not taking place under normal circumstances at all.
That's Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah, who has been reporting on the state for the paper.
The whole year, as we all know, the state has been completely fractured by violence. And the run-up to the elections itself was not a, election as usual. It was, the shadow of the conflict was very much over the run-up to the election itself. On election day, this is something that was anticipated. This was something that was feared, given that so many people, so many civilians now have arms, and that, the underground groups have also kind of been given a new life by this conflict. So on the day of polling, there have been multiple reports of, I quote, armed miscreants very much present at various polling stations in Manipur Valley, which is part of the inner Manipur constituency, which is a Meitei majority area. So complaints of coercion, attempts at booth capturing. Some voters said that when they reached the polling stations, they found that their vote had already been cast before they got there.
She says there were a number of instances of electoral malpractices, and the Congress party has now filed multiple complaints with officials saying that their agents were not allowed to operate there.
So the understanding is that, a lot of coercion happening by what voters says to vote for the BJP candidate. And not just that, but there were also instances of active violence happening, firing happening. So in one particular polling booth, the public was so upset, they set everything on fire. Because apparently a group of armed people came and they tried to take away the Congress agent. And when they tried to do that, the voters and the local volunteers kind of intervened and tried to foil that attempt. And in retaliation, these people shot at they opened fire at the polling station. So then the people got upset and burnt the EVM over there. In another place, there was firing. In multiple places, actually, irate voters damaged EVMs. So these complaints have been sent to the election office, to the CEO, and now, we have to wait and see whether polling will be reconducted in any stations and how many stations. So we'll find out later.
And Sukrita, has the Election Commission commented on the matter so far?
No, they have not formally commented. We just spoke informally to some election officials who told us that this is where things stand. One more thing to note is that there was a lot of uncertainty about how the election would play out in the Kuki-Zomi dominated areas, because the Kuki-Zomi dominated areas come under the outer Manipur constituency, which covers the Naga Hills, the Kuki-Zomi Hills, and also a section of the valley. So given that there are no Kuki-Zomi candidates this time, there was uncertainty about what the nature of participation would be, because people were saying that ultimately the call would be taken by community organizations, so tribal organizations and so on. So in one particular Kuki-Zomi dominated district, which is called Kangpokpi, various community organizations said that, let's abstain from elections. So they gave out a call to not participate. So polling was really low here. So the polling came in at around 28 to 29% in this particular constituency, while in the rest of Manipur, it stood at 68.58%. So considerably lower here. And from what I understand, the voting that did happen in Kangpokpi district was largely by the Naga residents and Nepali residents, basically other community residents who reside in that area.
And Sukrita, you had visited the region even before the polls began. Could you talk about how the situation was like then? For example, was campaigning happening there during that time?
See, all around, like there was this pervading sense that, look, this was anything but a festival of democracy. Basically, let's put it that way. A lot of people were not in favor of elections being held at all, because a lot of people felt that, the act of asking for votes at a time like this, is hugely inappropriate. It's also a pressure thing, right? To say ki we want the issue to be resolved before elections happen. So this was something that was being said by people on both sides of the divide. There were people who said that we will not participate in the election. But of course, there are lots of people who didn't feel that way. I mean, people also want to vote for what they think might be a more positive direction. So the inner Manipur constituency, like I said, which is like the Meitei majority area. So here we saw a full-fledged election actually take place. There were 6 contestants in the fray, and it was a hotly contested election. But you wouldn't see that because it was extremely muted. Not only was there public sentiment against open campaigning, there was also a diktat, which was issued by Arambai Tengol, which has been in the news a lot as a radical armed Meitei group, which has been playing like a really crucial role in this violence. So they issued a diktat that there should be no public campaigning, no public meetings, no use of loudspeakers, and so on. So because of this, the campaigning was largely at a very muted micro level, what they were calling in-camera meetings. So they would go to different localities and meet a bunch of people in some local leader's house. And also, of course, there's social media. So since the start of the conflict, some of these candidates like Professor Bimala Koijam, also the RPIA's candidate Maheshwar Thaunajam, who is a former actor, who've been very outspoken about various issues surrounding this conflict since the very beginning. So people, since the conflict started, they have also been engaging a lot more with the news, with social media. So they kind of know what these people represent.
Right, so everything that is happening related to campaigning is happening in a very muted way. Were there any rallies taken out at all?
Actually, significantly, the only, prominent rally we can say was that conducted by Union Home Minister Amit Shah, who was there recently. Yeah, so that was the only proper public meeting that we saw. The rest of it was happening in this hush-hush manner. So this is how things were largely playing out in the valley, the Meitei majority valley. In the hills, we have a very different picture because, like I said, this is the outer Manipur constituency covers the Naga areas, and the Nagas make up the largest chunk of voters over here. Then we have the Kuki-Zomi dominated areas, and we also have, a section of the Manipur Valley. So Meiteis make up around like 30% of the voters. So it's much more mixed. And normally this constituency sometimes it has the Kuki-Zomi MP, sometimes it has a Naga MP, and there've always been Kuki-Zomi candidates in the fray. But this time the community organizations kind of dictated that there should be no one contesting in the election. There were only Naga candidates. Part of this reason also is that neither of the major parties were going to give tickets to Kuki-Zomi candidates. So there were no Kuki-Zomi candidates in the fray. So when I traveled to that area, of course, people have very strong sentiments. A lot of people are not happy about the way that the situation has been handled. People on both sides are extremely frustrated by, the seeming lack of progress towards the resolution of this conflict. So people have strong opinions, obviously, in the Kuki-Zomi side as well. But most of the people I was speaking to were saying, but the final decision will be taken by our community leaders. So when I spoke to these leaders, they said that, they're meeting the different candidates. They would speak to the different candidates and come up with whatever works best, whatever they think will represent their interests best. So that's a very different kind of election playing out over there. Like if the campaigning in the valley is muted, like it was non-existent in that area.
And Sukrita, when you spoke to the people there, did they tell you what exactly they wanted at this point? How do they want this entire thing resolved?
So in the Kuki-Zomi areas, of course, it's been very clear from the beginning. Everybody has been kind of saying that they want a separate administration. So their stand from, I think, since last May itself has been that the only solution is a separate administration from the state of Manipur. And that is still what. So even when, you speak to voters now, they'll say that, the only end solution is separate administration. So that's clear. In the Meitei areas, it's not that clear. Basically, people want an end to the violence, something that has been, a very hot button topic in the Meitei areas, of course, has been, allegations of uncontrolled illegal immigration from Myanmar. of Chin people who are of the same ethnicity as Kuki people. So the dominant discourse in the valley has been that this is the root cause of the instability, the demographic instability in this region, and of the volatility of the region. So that is also reflected in what the candidates were talking about in the run-up to the elections.
And Sukrita, could you also talk about the recent incidents of violence we have seen in the region? Because we understand that so far 220 people have died, but there was a period last month where there was this lull in violence. So could you talk about what happened there and what is the situation now?
So when I went, everyone was talking about how there's a lull in the violence. So when I was there, it had been like more than a month of no active shootouts happening. And also the sense that, what people were saying is that, look, while the politicians are busy with elections, we're having peace. So there's also this kind of suspicion, also the sense that, if there was true will, then this situation could be contained. I'm just relaying to you what, the sentiment of people were at that time. The last major incident of violence we had seen was when a police officer was abducted by members of Arambai Tengol in the valley. So he had, rounded up and arrested some members for vehicle theft. And then Arambai Tengol members kind of stormed his house and he was abducted. That was the last major incident of violence that we saw. As, polls were approaching, it kind of died down. Otherwise, there's very frequent exchange of gunfire in areas, at the border of Meitei areas and Kuki-Zomi areas, which are the foothill areas. So every now and then there would be, there would be an exchange of gunfire. But during this period, it wasn't there. It was only much closer to the violence that there was like a really ghastly incident where one day there was firing along the border areas and the next day 2 Kuki-Zomi people were killed and there were these horrible videos of the bodies being mutilated, dragged around, like really grotesque violence. Again, that was the only incident though which took place, and this was about a week before polling took place. So we don't know why that happened during that time, but that's how it's been. And again, after that, polling day was when we saw violence again.
And next we talk about D Gukesh. Yesterday, the 17-year-old Indian Grandmaster from Chennai, D Gukesh, made history after he became the youngest ever player to win the candidate tournament, which is held to determine who will be challenging the reigning world champion. And so with this win, Gukesh will also become the youngest person ever to compete at the World Chess Championship scheduled for later this year. In this segment, we speak to Indian Express's Amit Kamath about Gukesh's win and what makes him different from his contemporaries. The conversation took place yesterday, a few hours after the news broke. So Amit, begin by telling us about the tournament itself. How does the candidate tournament work and what exactly is its significance?
So the candidates tournament is basically an event which is held to figure out the challenger to the world chess champion. It's a long drawn out process. Like somebody like a Gukesh had to play in certain tournaments to rack up points. There was a race for that as well. So whoever won that race then qualifies for the candidates through that one spot available. Somebody else had to qualify through ranking spot. Somebody else had to win a tournament and then qualify. So the candidates is something that you need to go through a very circuitous route just to get to the candidates. Once you get to the candidates, then it's like a proper marathon because for 3 weeks, you are playing in a double round robin tournament with 7 other people. You are playing each of those 7 people twice. And it's a relentless competition because it's classical chess. So there's no guarantee how long a game can go on. Like Gukesh, for example, battled for 6 hours in a game against Nijat Abbasov in the first half of the tournament. So that is the kind of, rigors that these guys have to undergo to, just make it through that process.
And could you talk about what stood out to you in Gukesh's games this time and what were the kind of things that worked in his favor?
I think with Gukesh, what has happened is he's basically been unflappable all throughout the tournament, right? So he had a chance when they were playing the 7th round. So 7th round was the match right before the halfway stage. So they had a break after the 7th round, and Gukesh was in a position where if he had won that game, he would have become the sole leader in the standings heading into a break. Now for him, that would have been a massive mental boost. He was winning that game for almost all of the match, and then he ran into time trouble, as in the time on his clock was really limited for him to make certain number of moves, and that's when he stumbled. He lost. We saw that he was very, very dejected at that point on the table itself. But then the thing was how quickly he could just forget about it and move on. And today, after he actually won it, he came to the press conference and said that, that moment was, I think, the most decisive moment for me, because despite the defeat and how cruel that defeat was, I was very, very happy going back, because I knew how well I had played. I knew I had only lost because of time troubles, not because I was bad on the board or something. Now that tells you that inside that 17-year-old mind is something that is far more mature than his years.
And Amit, he has become the youngest player to win this tournament. He will be the youngest to compete in the World Chess Championship. Talk about what it means for someone like him to get to this stage.
Let me just try and put that in context, right? When we say something like, he's the youngest ever player to win the candidates and he will be the youngest ever player to make it to the World Championship. So the candidates tournament has been around since 1950. So we are talking about almost 75 years ka history mein. Literally nobody has been as young as him. Like when Vishwanathan Anand won his first candidates tournament, he was 25. When Magnus Carlsen won his first candidates tournament, he was 22. Gukesh is 17. And see, for Gukesh, he's somebody who's always chased these milestones. He was very close to becoming the youngest ever grandmaster in the world. He missed that marker by just by 17 days. Currently, I believe he's the third youngest grandmaster ever in the world. He became a grandmaster at the age of 12 years, 7 months or something like that. So that just goes to tell you how insane it is, because becoming a grandmaster in itself is not a mean feat. Like, you have to play so many tournaments, you have to register so many wins over opponents who are rated a certain level. I'm sorry, I have to bring up a cricket equivalent, but it's the equivalent of saying you have to hit 6 sixes, but only to a bowler of Jasprit Bumrah's caliber. So becoming a grandmaster is a little bit like that, and he did it in the age of 12. Then last year he became the first Indian ever to dethrone Vishwanathan Anand as India number one in the rankings after a gap of 36 years. So Gukesh has always, chased these first, youngest, all of these milestones. So this perfectly fits into that mindset of his.
And Amit, over the years, chess culture in India has grown a lot. And that's partly because of how decentralized the game has become and how easily accessible information is with the help of the internet, especially with the way one can use chess engines, softwares that help players analyze their moves. But you write that Gukesh actually didn't use chess engines early on in his training, which is unusual, right?
Yeah, in fact, in Gukesh's case, it was a radical idea and it was risky. Because everybody is doing something and they are all getting fast progress. So why wouldn't you want to get your kid also using engines pretty early on? But the idea with Gukesh was that, when you have the support of engine, it almost acts as a crutch, at which point you forget to walk by yourself, right? So the idea was to remove that crutch so that you don't have that, the engine suggests this, so this is a right move. So you keep relying mentally on something else to help you out. So Gukesh was trained in that way, where an engine, I don't think, entered his life or personally until he was in his 2500s, which is a pretty high rating for anybody to start using engines for the first time. Even Vishwanathan Anand, we were talking to the other day, he said that, it's a very, very unique and a very novel idea, very rare in the current generation and the current scenario that we are seeing, because the current generation is all about using engines, all about knowing how to use engines and using it to their advantage.
And if we look at his contemporaries, what else do you think stands out about him? What sets him apart?
I think one of the things is that he's somebody who just knows how to take heartbreaks in his stride, because in his young career, he has had way too many of them now. Like, I'll give you an example. At the Olympiad in Chennai, 2022, he went on this insane run where he defeated 8 people that he had faced for India too. It was a team event, so he was playing for India too. And in the 9th or the 10th game, he's in a winning position against another teenage prodigy from Uzbekistan called Nodirbek Abdusattorov. And he can see the victory on the horizon. And then the game slips out of his hand and he loses. And because of that, India 2 team did not win a gold medal. They won another color of medal, but then the gold was all that mattered at that stage. So he was very, very heartbroken. Now, he was, I think, at that stage, he must have been, 15 or something. Now, Vishwanathan Anand was there and he realized that, I should try and talk to this kid because Anand fancies himself as something of a mentor for him. So Anand took it upon himself to try and counsel him, try and get him to relax a little bit, not be so heartbroken after that. So Anand walks up to him, tries to talk to him. Sometime later, this kid is like, sir, I think I am over the defeat. I don't think I need to be cheered up or whatever. So Anand eventually gives up on trying to cheer him up and they end up playing table tennis for, I think, a good part of 2 hours or something. But I mean, that just shows you that, he's taken a hard punch on the jaw and he's just shrugged it off. He's basically said, okay, like I tried, but then couldn't do it. So what?
Right, and when we talk about this tournament, nobody had really expected him to win. World number 1 Magnus Carlsen, for example, had said, no way Gukesh is winning. And even Vishy Anand thought that he was the underdog. What has been their response since his win? Have you heard from Magnus Carlsen, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just look at the way Magnus had spoken about Gukesh. Initially, he had said, I cannot imagine him winning the candidates at all. He said that, I think he will certainly win a couple of games, but he will have fairly bad losses. Now, today, he was doing commentary, I think, during the candidates itself, when the last round was still playing out. Carlsen said that, Gukesh is a little bit stronger than he and the others had realized. He didn't name the others, but there were a lot of these players, former world champions, all of them who had said that, Gukesh is not going to have a good tournament. He's just there for experience and things like that. Then Carlsen went on to explain why he had rated Gukesh so poorly. He said that, the thing about Gukesh is that he can appear a little vulnerable at times. And he's not very good at these faster events in chess, like, rapid and blitz events. And that is something that confuses people when they make an assessment about him over how good a player he is or how bad a player he is. But now he's proven himself to be a very strong player in this tournament. So Carlsen basically very humbly accepting that, he had been completely off center when he was making his assessment about Gukesh.
And now that we know that he will play against the Chinese Grandmaster Ding Liren, who's the current reigning world champion, do we know how he will fare against him and what Liren's game has been like lately?
So this candidates tournament, it was laced with a little bit of desperation for all the 8 players because of 2 reasons. One is Magnus Carlsen, because Magnus Carlsen had clearly said that, he's not going to compete in this candidates. But that does not mean that he will not compete in the next candidates. And if Magnus does decide to play, he's hands-on the favorite, irrespective of how many years he's not played chess or whatever it is. So people knew that, this time at least they know that Magnus is not there. So that is one good reason for them to push even harder this time. Second thing is, ever since he's won the world championship, Ding Liren has looked very, very shaky. The handful of tournaments that he has played, he's basically looked like a shadow of himself. He's been vulnerable on the board. He's messed up in very basic situations and things like that. So I think for all the 8 candidates, they realize that, this is the best chance they're going to have to become the world champion at least once. And now the world champion is a very elite club. I think only 17 people ever in history have been part of that elusive club. So obviously it's a very celebrated club to want to be a part of. And this is, I think, the best time that anybody would have wanted to be in the world championship battle, especially because of how vulnerable Ding has seen.
And in the end, we talk about the Uddhav Thackeray-led Shiv Sena. On Sunday, the Election Commission of India had issued a notice to the party regarding the usage of the words Bhavani and Hindu in its theme song. This song was released last week to promote its new poll symbol, the flaming torch. Hindu ha tudha dharma janu na ghe he samarma jeevan kartya satu bahar ek swapna ek chinna Shiv Sena jeevana
Shiv Sena.
The video of the theme song depicts visuals of the party's founder, the late Bal Thackeray, holding a flaming torch, along with Shiv Sena workers and party chief Uddhav Thackeray conducting rallies. Now, yesterday, Uddhav Thackeray said that the notice issued by the Election Commission was an insult to Maharashtra. He stated that his party would not comply with the poll panel's directive to remove the two references from the song. Thackeray also criticized the commission, saying that the notice was an attack on the dignity of Maharashtra and its deity.
जो गीत है उसमें कोरस में जो महाराष्ट्र में हर जगह एक नारा लगता है जय भवानी जय शिवाजी, वो नारा हमने लिया है। तो चुनाव आयोग ने कहा है कि उसमें से जय भवानी शब्द निकालो। आप कौन होते हो? भवानी माता हमारी कुलदेवता है, तो उसका स्मरण करना क्या गुनाह है? हमने ऐसे नहीं कहा कि जय भवानी कहकर आप वोट दे दो या भवानी माता की जय जो कहेंगे उसको वोट दे दो, तो ये हम कभी भी स्वीकार नहीं करेंगे। लेकिन महाराष्ट्र की जो कुलदेवता है भवानी माता, उसका उल्लेख हम तो जरूर करेंगे और उसका अपमान हम नहीं सहेंगे।
It's worth noting that since its inception, the Shiv Sena has been using Jai Bhavani, Jai Shivaji as its political slogan. During the press conference, Thackeray also mentioned two incidents involving PM Modi and Amit Shah at election rallies last year. In the first video clip he showed, Modi is heard saying when you press the button to vote, press the button as Jai Bajrang Bali.
क्या कर्नाटक गाली देने वालों को कभी माफ करता है क्या? कभी करता है क्या? बराबर जम करके सजा करोगे। जब पोलिंग बूथ में बटन दबाओ ना, तब जय बजरंग बली बोल करके सजा दे देना इनको।
And in the second clip, Amit Shah can be seen saying that if a BJP government is formed, then it will provide free Ram Lalla darshan to all.
मंदिर का दर्शन करना चाहते हैं, हमने तय किया है पूरे तेलंगाना में जिसको भी राम मंदिर का दर्शन करना है उसको बारी बारी सरकार के द्वारा फ्री ऑफ कॉस्ट अयोध्या जाने की व्यवस्था भारतीय जनता पार्टी करेगी। भाई और बहनों,
referring to these two speeches, Thackeray questioned whether their conduct was in accordance with the Election Code of Conduct, adding that if the EC wants to take action against the party, it should first act against Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Amit Shah. You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.